To order the August 27th meeting of the Gainesville City Plan Board. Ms. McMullen, if you would call us to order. read the roll, please.
Yes. Yeah, what am I doing? Okay. Robert Ackerman.
Here.
Jamie Bell.
Here.
Tina Certain is absent. Robert Murmer will be joining late. Jane Morosky.
Here.
Joshua Day.
Here.
Jason Sanchez.
Here.
Stephanie Sutton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Fantastic. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That wasn't all of us.
Aye. Sorry.
I felt like all those opposed? All right, the agenda is adopted. It's going to be an oddly contentious adoption. Do we have approval of the minutes of last meeting? Or motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Right, all those in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, we all like the minutes from last meeting. At this point in the meeting, I open it up to members of the public who want to speak. I mean, it's you guys. But if you guys want to speak on something that is not on the agenda, the floor would be yours.
Oh, Ralph's coming up.
No, I thought he was doing it. All right, seeing none, let's start with the first item on the agenda, please, Ms. McMullen.
All right, first item on the agenda, 2026-538 HCA I-75 corridor sign height extension request LD 26000080 with a presentation from Allison Pager.
Okay, good evening, board chair and board members. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Allison Pager. I'm a planner in the Department of Sustainable Development, and I'm before you tonight to present a height extension request for an I-75 corridor sign for HCA, identified as petition number LD 26-000080. This request is for subject parcel 06974-040-000 for property that is generally located along Archer Road and Southwest 41st Boulevard. It's adjacent to I-75 and is home to a recently constructed hospital campus and freestanding emergency room. This parcel is owned by HCA Florida Gainesville Hospital. The application is submitted by Benu Enterprises, and there is representation here tonight by the applicant and ownership. The parcel has medical services zoning and office land use designation. The next few slides are going to provide some context and familiarity to the subject area before jumping into the details of the request. So provided here is a zoning map of the subject area. The parcel for this request is outlined in red. This parcel sits right near the city limits. To the north is Archer Road and general business zoning. To the south is business industrial. To the east is I-75, and to the west there are some additional medical services and multifamily. And then further west is Alachua County jurisdiction and their residential zoning. And similarly, provided here is a land use map of the subject area with the parcel outlined in red and similar trends for the land use. And this is a summary of the nearby existing uses and the zoning and land use as previously seen. In terms of existing uses, north there's a gas station, a hotel, a restaurant. South there's self-storage and office space. East is of course I-75 and the FDOT right-of-way. And west there is largely residential and agriculture properties. And the aerial base map as well to kind of see what this area looks like. I wanted to provide a couple of point of view slides using Google Street View to help give some familiarity to the area for this request if you haven't been by there recently. So this slide shows the intersection of Archer Road and 41st Boulevard. So this is looking towards the I-75 overpass with the hospital campus on the right. This is to show the main entrance to entering the parcel and accessing the facilities. So turning right at this intersection would take you down 41st Boulevard, and that roadway is what largely goes around the parcel and how you get to the parking lot that accesses the facilities. And here we are located on the off-ramp from the southbound lanes of I-75. This is heading towards Archer Road, so looking directly towards the HCA campus with I-75 to the left. And as you can see here, and this is going to come up later as well, around these interstate areas, especially the interchange areas, There's going to be larger areas of state right-of-way associated with these places, especially the overpass where there's going to be larger gaps where there's landscaping and infrastructure and right-of-way areas. And here we are on I-75 in the northbound lane heading north. This is located at the entrance of that exit ramp that we were just on. So looking towards the hospital campus, which is on the left, just to kind of show that view. And finally, here it is located on the actual overpass, specifically in the southbound lanes, looking to the right over towards where the HCA campus would be. And you can see Archer Road, and we can also see the on-ramp area as well. Okay, so now that we're a little bit more about the subject area, we're going to jump into the request. We do not get these requests a lot, so just wanted to provide some extra information to cover on this slide about what I-75 corridor signs are in general before we jump into the height part. So these signs are a type of freestanding permanent sign that are specifically covered in section 30-9.7D of the Land Development Code. There are certain criteria for meeting the requirements of an I-75 corridor sign in order to be allotted having one. If not, the development would be subject to the regular allotment of freestanding permanent signs as allowed by the code. These include that the signage is for the permitted use in a non-residential district. In this case, it's medical services, and hospital is a permitted use by right, and the sign is for the hospital. The location being within a quarter mile of the centroid of an I-75 interchange with any arterial roadway. The sign should be readily visible from I-75. The sign area of the I-75 corridor sign, in combination with other permitted signs on the development, must not exceed 300 square feet. And the sign should not be located on frontage where adjacent or facing properties have single-family land use. These criteria have been confirmed by staff. The sign area will have to be maintained during permitting if this receives approval. And I'm going to use the next few slides for the height part. So this section further provides that an I-75 corridor sign by right can have a maximum sign structure height of 18 feet. For context, the normal maximum height for a freestanding sign is 10 feet for the structure. This section further details a process for a height extension request, which is why we're here tonight, where an application can be applied to request up to a maximum of 90 feet in height, with certain special considerations that must be met during review, with the city plan board to be the final authority decision maker. For this sign, the applicant is requesting 30 feet for their height extension request. Staff has reviewed the application with the criteria outlined in section 30-9.7D of the Land Development Code for height extension requests for I-75 corridor signs, the criteria of which are shown on this screen. I'm going to provide some details about some of the criteria, but please note that a more in-depth analysis of the criteria are provided in the staff report. I'll also use some of the next slides to help with demonstrating some of these points. So for criteria A, the applicant provides that the special condition and circumstance necessitating the need for a sign structure with a height of 30 feet in order to be seen by motorists on I-75 from the hospital campus is the intervening landscaping, grading, and infrastructure along the corridor that significantly reduces the effective sight line to ground-mounted signage that is at or below 18 feet. Staff finds through examination of past land development reviews for the hospital campus and through a site visit to examine the proposed location of the sign in relation to the sight line of the I-75 interchange that the justification is sound. So between the hospital campus and the I-75 interstate, there are multiple natural man-made buffers, including stormwater areas, right-of-way, both county and state. There's the on-ramp, there's roadways, landscaping, and infrastructure that is associated with the overpass, kind of seen with both of these. So this picture is you're on 41st Boulevard, the parking lot for the hospital's on the right, you're looking towards the interstate. For criteria B, the applicant and their engineer provide that the proposed 30 feet requested for the height extension, which is 12 feet above what is allowed by right for the I-75 corridor signs, is the minimum necessary to achieve a readable sign face above the obstructed sight line in order to deliver adequate advance identification to I-75 motorists. The applicant and engineer further provide with proposed signage elevations as seen here that the letter height would provide optimal reading from 275 feet with maximum full reading from 825 to 1,238 feet. For criteria D, the request is found by staff to be compatible with the primary use of the property as a hospital campus and the location is found to be optimal due to being directly adjacent to the I-75 interchange. For additional context in terms of compatibility and height for existing structures on the property, the permitting for the campus shows a maximum building height of 4 stories and 58 feet from the elevations of that review, and that's outside of necessary rooftop equipment. And considering other factors like FAA requirements and the Gainesville Regional Airport height zone requirements, this property being within subzone 2, the proposed height of 30 feet would remain below the height that is currently existing on the property as constructed on site and well below what is allowed by right in the medical services zoning district and the office future land use category. And lastly on that point, the proposed location of the sign is nearest that I-75 interchange, so it's a pretty large parcel. So where the proposed sign is found to be optimal for what I-75 corridor signs are for. And it's opposite the side of the property that is nearest the city limits and nearest the Alachua County residentially zoned parcels that are on the other side of the parcel. So it provides distance and buffer to any potential impacts of the sign height from that side of the property. And finally, here is provided the public notice items as required for this public meeting. And lastly, based on the review of the criteria mentioned in this presentation in the staff report, staff recommends approval of petition LD 26-000080 for the I-75 corridor sign height extension request for the sign structure height of 30 feet. As the final decision-making authority for these requests, the Land Development Code in Section 30-9.7D outlines the 3 applicable decisions available for the board in making their decision that are provided on the screen. In addition, staff did receive today a public comment in the form of an email that did express concern pertaining to the property owner authorization. The concern was reviewed and responded to, and no issues were found to continue from that concern. So just wanted to share that. So we are available for questions and discussion, and the applicant and also representation from HCA is here as well.
Good. Thank you so much for a very thorough presentation. Does anybody on the board have questions? What am I doing here? Miss Bell, I'm like out of practice.
Thank you for that. I'm just curious, what did because the email wasn't forwarded to us, that I could see what was the resident's concern?
So they were referencing a section of Florida Administration Code that was for wastewater permitting, but they were calling into question the property owner authorization, because for any application you have to have property owner authorization, so it's who is signing the application. So if someone's applying on behalf of a property owner, that is part of the checks that we do as staff in the submittal. So all of that was found to be in line with what our submittal is. So we just replied and to address their concern and let them know that it did meet the standards that are in our land development code, and that the section he was specifically referencing wasn't really applicable, but also just to let them know that we did do a thorough check for what our procedures are for checking each of those conditions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And the property owner authorization and the letter of authorization that was also provided in the submittal are part of the backup as well.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Pager? Well, we've got her up here. Seeing none, if the applicant wants to come and speak, you're more than welcome to. If you don't, that's also totally fine.
I can never be that thorough.
Fair enough. It was a very good presentation.
We don't get a lot of these, so.
But with this is the first giant sign item that's come before me, at least. So I don't recall having to do with that. Oh yeah.
That was fun.
Oh, well, see, these guys have done it longer than I have, so they've seen it a little bit more than I have. All right. Well, I suppose I'll open it up to members of the public. I don't think you guys have an opinion on this at all, so we'll bring it back to the board for discussion and a motion. Do we have a motion on this item?
I'll make a motion to approve LD 26000080 HCA I-75 corridor sign height extension request as presented.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It's unanimous. All right, congratulations, you have a big sign.
I appreciate it very much.
So Ms. McMullen, is this you? Are you presenting the next one? Well, all right, if you want to read it into the
Sure.
record, and then the floor will be yours.
Yeah, so this next item is just a discussion item for you all. Not asking for any votes this evening, but wanted to bring you an update on one of the, or a few of the statutory changes that have gone into effect as of July 1st of this year. There's several different statutes that have been adopted that go into effect at various times. So one that I'll be talking about this evening is House Bill 803. There are a few others which will bring you more info on that go into effect in January of next year. But there's a few things in the bill that will impact how the planning and building departments operate, and some of the land development code regulations that are currently in our code, and may be policy considerations for you all. So I just wanted to inform you of those and just let you know kind of some things that we've been working on. So just an informational item, and then feel free to have discussion afterwards if there, if there's anything you want to propose implementing. But yeah, so just to give you an overview, like I said, this is specifically related to House Bill 803, effective in July. A few things that it provides for are greater statewide standardization of permit applications and electronic permitting. That's something that the city already does. We already do all electronic building permitting. So there won't be much that we have to do to address that, but that's kind of one of the big things that's been talked about with this bill. It provides for more specific requirements for communicating deficiencies, denials, and incomplete applications. That's part of building permits as well. And you'll see a few of the things that are covered here are more pertaining to the building division specifically, but things that we work closely with them on, and we do participate in building permit reviews, so they will affect the planning in some ways as well. One of the big things that it does is provide new limits on permit fees and the type of documentation that can be required by the building department. Again, that's a building division thing, but that's a big thing that the building division is working on right now. Providing for expanded permit exemptions for qualifying small residential projects, expanded authority and use of private providers for plan review and inspections. Probably the biggest thing that you might be interested in at a policy level are new requirements affecting manufactured and off-site constructed housing. And we'll get into some more specifics on that, and then some limits on certain local architectural and urban design requirements. So the first few, I think we'll go through pretty quickly because they largely are related to building, but just to kind of let you know at a high level some of the things that the bill covers. It does require for applications to be made available electronically. Like I said, we already do that, so not something that we need to specifically address. It does require additionally more specific review comments for building permit reviews. So administered by the building department or the building division, the planning department does review a large number of building permits as well. So that'll be something operationally that we'll need to make sure we're doing as a team, is providing very specific review comments for building permits. Something we try to do anyway, but just something to kind of keep a closer eye on. So the emphasis on this is a predictable, code-based, and transparent review for building permits rather than a discretionary or open-ended type of situation. The next part I really won't go into a lot of detail on because it really just impacts building fees, which I'm not highly involved with, and that's not my division, but this is something that the building official is working very diligently on to figure out changes in building permit fees and how they're calculated and what type of documentation they can require for those. Another thing that it changes is allowing for single-family homeowners or their contractors to be exempt from permitting for certain work valued under $7,500 when specific conditions are met. So it can't be structural, electrical, plumbing work, mechanical, or gas work, and it can't be located within a flood hazard area. But essentially, what we think this will largely cover are things like sheds and detached accessory structures. So, you know, one of the impacts from that will be, we'll see less permits come through for things like sheds. They will still be required to meet zoning standards though. So things like building setbacks, typically in a single family zoning district, for example, it's typically a 5-foot setback from the rear property line and the side property lines. They still need to meet those setbacks, but they won't have to apply for a permit for it. So, you know, we've talked about ways of just kind of putting FYIs out there for people, letting them know technically you still need to meet these setbacks. Essentially, it would become a code enforcement issue if it starts to become a problem where people are installing sheds that either don't meet setbacks or don't meet certain size requirements in certain instances, things like that. So that's something that will affect planning in some ways. Did you want to ask questions now? We can just talk through each item.
I think I just, through context, my question was answered.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and let me know, you know, feel free to stop me at any time with a question on any of these in particular. The next thing that we've talked about a good bit in planning are restrictions on glazing requirements. So local governments may not require more than 15% glazing on the primary facade of most new commercial or mixed-use projects. There are some limitations or exceptions within historic districts. This will impact the glazing or the percentage of windows that we can require in transect zones and in mixed-use and non-residential zoning districts. And the glazing requirements in transect zones are fairly high. So that's in effect now. At some point, it'd be probably a good idea to update our code to reflect that. But currently, as of July 1st, we can't require more than 15% on the commercial and mixed-use projects on the primary facade. So that's something that's impacting us with this. Along the lines of design requirements, there are also some restrictions on branding and corporate identity, kind of interference, so to speak, and that largely as it pertains to signage, in addition to any restrictions that might interfere with the ability for gas stations to comply with gas price signage visibility requirements. I'm not really seeing anything that stands out too much on these at this point in time. I think you know, we'll see in the future if anything specific comes up with signage. Perhaps there could be questions about interfering with logos and things like that. But you know, look, we don't have anything. The city doesn't have anything in the code that specifically talks about those things in particular. So we'll see kind of what the effects are. There is a good deal of expanded private provider authority, again, largely related to the building division. We do expect to see an increase in instances of private providers for building items. A different bill that we'll talk about at another time that goes into effect in January kind of expands this to get into planning functions. For this one in particular, this is just affecting the building division, but it's a big thing that this bill does, so just wanted to bring it up. It really doesn't affect planning too much. But the other thing that this part of the bill does is stress the importance of timeliness of comments. So, you know, there will be increased pressure on making sure that we get our comments in all departments on time and issued. Otherwise, there are potentially some consequences of sort of automatic approvals, so to speak. So just something that we're going to have to look at and make sure we are really tight on our timelines. So probably the big one for planning from this bill is the placement for residential manufactured buildings. So the language talks about a couple of different things. So placement in RV parks in addition to placement in single family districts. So one of the things that it does is require that state certified residential manufactured buildings may not be denied placement in mobile home or similar communities. So that includes RV parks. The bigger one probably is talking about qualifying off-site constructed homes must be allowed anywhere single-family detached homes are allowed. So that, and there's some specific definitions in the bill. I can read a couple of those off to you. But it talks about off-site constructed residential dwellings, meaning a manufactured building, as defined in Florida statute, which is intended for single-family residential use, or a manufactured home defined in a separate statute, which is constructed in whole or in part off-site and is treated as real property. So this will impact the those type of structures being allowed in single-family districts and other districts that allow single-family homes. Previously, and up until recent history, the application has been of the code language that we have, which doesn't generally allow for those types of structures to be constructed in kind of the typical zoning district. It kind of limited them to mobile home zoning. And the code is pretty outdated. It talks about a structure that has an integral chassis, things like that. At any rate, this is something that we are implementing now, allowing for manufactured homes based on state statute. So the bill requires, or it does state that local governments can put additional standards on these types of structures, but they've got to be applied equally to site-built homes and non-site-built homes. And the types of standards that a local government could add are things like roof pitch, square footage, exterior materials, foundation treatment, setbacks, and orientation. It's pretty specific as to what can be regulated. So the expected impact of this is approval of qualifying off-site constructed homes in zoning districts that allow single family as a use. At this time, staff isn't proposing any particular additional standards, but we wanted to bring it to you for as a policy consideration. So this is kind of wrapping it up, and then we can go into discussion. So the big takeaways for this bill in relation to planning and building in Gainesville, it allows for greater housing flexibility. So like I mentioned, the off-site factory-built housing must be accommodated. It provides for private providers and sort of limits the city's ability to do duplicative reviews. It requires timeliness of reviews. It looks at local governments reviewing their fees. It does impact some of our design regulations, and it applies some exemptions for the smaller permits for single-family homeowners. So areas for staff follow-up that we've identified, the building division is reviewing their permit fee schedules and fee calculation methodologies. We're working to make sure that we've got development review and building permit workflows, providing for private provider coordination and meeting timelines. We're working to update public-facing permit information and application materials, and just coordinating across planning, building, legal, and all the various functions to make sure we're implementing these changes. And that's it. So I wanted to get any feedback from y'all or answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Ms. Sutton.
I would say I'm generally interested in what we're able to do on the, like, mobile homes, off-site built homes, what we're willing and able to put into the code. And I would like to maybe get some analysis of what other places are doing. I know the county did implement something recently. it might, I don't know how many of you are going to the state planning conference. That may be something you can ask others about there if there's staff going to the conference. I'm interested in seeing what our options are and considering putting something in place. I think even if it's orientation or whatever we can do, I think we should think about it. How the parking is associated, I think if we don't have any design standards other than you can just put this on a single family lot, and with the densities that we're allowing in our single family zoning right now, it could kind of create a situation that I don't think we want to see in single family districts.
Ms. Bell?
Out of curiosity, can you expand on that a little bit more, Ms. Sutton, on where you think this is headed? Just to help me understand.
I just think we changed the single family zoning requirements in the last couple of years. So we have very small lot sizes now, very small setbacks. I think you could create a series of really, really tiny lots, and essentially it would look almost like a trailer park in any single family zoned place. Because your side setbacks would only be 5. You could have a mobile home in the middle. I mean, without any design considerations, if you look at what our lot standards allow, we could be creating something that I don't think is compatible with all of the neighborhoods of Gainesville.
I would be curious if staff could provide at a future meeting sort of like a table or something indicating what the current restrictions are on traditional single family versus off-site built, because the new law is that they have to be allowed, and it can't be more restrictive ordinances than traditionally built homes. So could you help us understand more what the implications are by providing kind of like a side-by-side of what our current regulations are? Because like from the perspective of more opportunities for affordable housing, I'm intrigued, but I understand what you're saying from an aesthetic and like neighborhood vibe, for lack of a more technical term, perspective. But so I'd just be curious from a what our starting point is before we look into what we could do to smooth this transition, if you will, since it's being required regardless.
Sure. Yes, definitely. And so I can let you know now that there generally are not design requirements for new single family homes. An issue that we would run into with adding any new requirements is, Senate Bill 180.
So it's not allowed.
Making things more restrictive than they currently are. So any kind of restrictions that we put, they have to also be, they're just applicable across the board in the zoning district.
I guess what the confusion is for me at face value is like what the difference would be with like putting a series of tiny on-site built homes versus smaller off-site built homes, and what like the practical difference would be. That's more of what I'm looking for education on, I guess, to help me understand. That makes sense.
Dr. Murmur?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. McMullen, there are 2 different requirements. So anything with the chassis would be put in the requirements on regulating mobile home parks would be relevant, right? Because they have to be state approved mobile homes.
So I think
versus the manufactured homes that would go in single family neighborhoods, those we could require that they not be allowed if they have a chassis, in which case it would only allow what most manufactured home manufacturers build, which look just like on-site built houses. But if you look at an on-site built house that has vinyl siding, that's what they look like.
Right.
Like we can still require that they're put into a foundation and all that stuff, right?
So I think, and I may have made it a little bit more confusing the way I described it, but I think the current So the current definition in the city's land development code of a mobile home talks about,
But mobile homes would not.
Yeah.
The part of the new law that affects single-family zone neighborhoods, mobile homes would, that new preemption doesn't apply to mobile homes.
it does apply to mobile homes fabricated after June 15th, 1976. So effectively, yes, it is allowing mobile homes. And I don't think the code's definition is really applicable anymore in talking about the chassis and whatnot. I'm sorry, I might have made that a little bit more confusing.
Well, I don't think so, because I thought, because if it's a mobile home, that's already regulated by the state. Like, the state decides what's considered a mobile home. So
Right.
the new law does say that we do have to allow mobile homes, stuff that can be picked
Essentially,
up
yeah.
and taken
Yes.
off-site whenever.
I mean, there still will be, there are requirements in terms of how it has to be anchored. It probably would be more helpful to get information from the building official on kind of those distinctions, because he explains it much better than I can. But they don't necessarily have to be put on a permanent foundation. They can be attached. They can be like piers and things like that. So we did discuss, maybe looking at compatibility standards of requiring a permanent foundation. That could cause, the concern that came up for us on that is some of the older neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods that have houses on piers. So
Slab on grade's not ubiquitous.
those are the type of things we've talked about so far, and why we ultimately, so far, have decided not to recommend any additional restrictions, because we don't want that to affect houses that are already in existence, and it's not necessarily always the way things are done, but.
So the last thing I said, and it sounds like
Bless you.
maybe, sounds like maybe the next step that I think we should do is maybe get a sense of the designs that are currently offered by mobile home manufacturers. To see what we're possibly dealing with, because you said if it was manufactured prior to a certain date.
It's after
The
1976.
date was 1976, though.
1976.
So, I mean-
We're not talking about just modern
1976?
things that people would buy
1976.
now. It's not things that would necessarily be new and modern
Yeah.
for a code. I mean,
Right.
that's why I think design considerations, to the extent that
Yeah.
we can think about, I'd like to see our options.
I agree. Okay, I totally missed the 1976 thing. Sorry.
I didn't say that to begin with, so you've got to go a little
Long
bit
time
deeper
ago.
into the statute.
50 years.
I imagine, I don't know who's going to the planning conference. I imagine this is going to be a topic of conversation there, if not even a presentation. I would just be interested in you all gathering information about what other communities in Florida are doing, because
yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
Florida-specific issue, and bringing just some information back to us. I would like to explore that further and not just let it go tonight as we're not taking action on this.
Yeah, we're happy to do that research.
Dr. Murmur.
Mr. Chair, should we make a motion about that? Or something?
I mean, Brittany, do you feel like you need a motion to that effect to bring us back more information?
Not necessarily. It's up to you.
Okay. I have a question about this. Maybe, and this is actually good that we've got our attorney here. My understanding of SB 180 is that we couldn't apply any new restrictions on mobile homes, because we would be applying new restrictions to single-family homes, which would be a new restriction, which we're not allowed to do.
That's my understanding as well. So sorry, you were asking, Sean.
Oh, I mean,
We've talked about it,
Yeah.
and I think we both agree that, I don't think we could make those changes until at least October of 27, or if something changes.
or we're barring a hurricane,
Right,
a state of emergency being declared.
sure.
Oh, that's you. Ms. Bell.
I don't disagree with the idea of evaluating what our options are, but I would ask if staff, I would just ask if staff could provide some sort of cost impact assessment of what any requirements could potentially add, because without getting into any of the politics of it, strictly from someone who's on the AHAC, the affordable housing perspective of it, it's an opportunity to bring in more affordable housing infill options within our city, which is desperately needed. So from a neighborhood again, I'm having a brain fart on the word, but like neighborhood vibe perspective, compatibility perspective, I get where we're going with that, but I'd be interested in what the cost impact of, enforcing that compatibility would have, and would it take away the affordable benefit, essentially? So, thank you.
Can I just say, I think the impacts of it are a little overblown. I think it'd be great to have more housing diversity in neighborhoods. I think the idea of the vibe of a neighborhood being disrupted is, I don't agree with that thinking, because neighborhoods are ever changing. And so if this is a way a neighborhood changes, so be it. I also think that the neighborhoods that are most concerned about their vibe changing are probably not the ones where people are seeking to put manufactured or mobile homes on. They can make more money and using those lots in other ways. So I always get worried when we bring up this like character of the neighborhood thing, because I'd rather have more people in houses than caring about some. Everybody has a different vision of what a neighborhood's supposed to be like anyway. So trying to please everybody, I think, is a fool's errand. With that said, Ms. Sutton.
Yeah, I don't think, I'm necessarily worried about the old established neighborhoods of Gainesville. I think my concern is, I think you underestimate the the profit motive of developers that are trying to maximize some of the areas around the university and some sensitive areas that already have had a lot of redevelopment in a more tasteful way than this might be.
Right.
I think, people who have a large profit motive have done some really interesting things in the neighborhoods close to campus. And I'm afraid, not for necessarily what's going to happen next to my house, but what's going to happen to these parts of our community that have already been impacted immensely without this being a potential option.
Dr. Murmur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'm not concerned about the aesthetic of the neighborhood or the feel or anything. I grew up in a mobile home that was manufactured in the early 80s, and the neighborhood I grew up in that's all there was, and there are just serious health and safety issues with a lot of the 80s mobile homes. So I'm concerned about, even if you pack them together, the fire risk of these particular buildings. I mean, if this was, anything built after 2010, I'd be like, whatever. But I am concerned about the fire risk in particular, and also just general habitability of some of these old. I don't know if that's useful for you when you're gathering information, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board on this item? Boy, it sure is fascinating, all the stuff the state is doing. It's basically putting us out of business on the board,
At least somebody is.
Yeah, well, Dr. Murmur. Yeah.
Mobile home conversation. Private providers of fees. If you have to, all staff really have to work harder and faster to meet the new deadlines, would that additional work be able to be factored into the fees? So I think you have to give them a discount for using a private provider essentially, but it is putting more work on staff to rush to get comments on. So is there a way to recoup that cost?
That's a good question. I would have to let the building department speak a little bit more about that. I can tell you they are doing an assessment of all of that right now. So I can let you know what the results are of that. I haven't been as involved with the building fee part. I mean, I can tell you the building fund, though, is, without trying to get into too much detail on the budget, the building fund is separate from the general fund. It's kind of only for the building department. But I'd be happy to let you know what
Yeah,
the
I'm just
outcome-
generally concerned about
yeah.
them being overworked for this and not being able to recoup any of that cost. But
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions or comments about any of the items that were just presented in our statutory updates? If not, I think we'll move on to board member training with the board's favorite city attorney, Mr. McDermott.
Good evening. Sean McDermott, Assistant City Attorney. So staff asked me to come and just speak to the board about just the general laws that pertain to public boards. Also, just on Tuesday, went to the Development Review Board, and a big chunk of those members are brand new, and so they appreciated and wanted me to give the full-blown presentation. This board has a lot of experience, and so
We have a couple, we have, there's still some newness, I think, on a.
sure. So I was just going to give you the option of, I can either walk through the whole, what I think are the highlights of what you need to know, or alternatively, if there's just any questions or things you've always thought about, like how does that work legally with our board, or what can or can't we do? I'm happy to go down that road too. So whatever you want to prefer, whatever's the most helpful, I'll do. I just, given your experience and new members, like I'm happy to, even if it one-on-one, if it's better in that regard. I just don't want to bore Bob and everybody else to death.
I think you could start with a high-level overview, and then, this board is not afraid of asking questions, as I found. So
Right.
If they'll have questions, I feel like they will pepper you with questions.
Okay, yeah, well, of course, feel free to ask questions, but I'll just,
Actually, we've got one already.
Okay.
No, I was just gonna say, even though like some of us are newer to this board, we think we've all served on boards.
Yeah.
Like, Dr. Memmer's on the county AHAG, I'm on the city AHAG. Oh my God, I forgot your last name, I'm so sorry. Moraski was just saying that she's been a city planner and on a board, so like, so basic, we're probably okay on, just for what that's worth.
Yeah, that's what I assume, so yeah, I'll just hit just a refresher on what I think are high-level things. And feel free to ask any questions at any time, or we can, veer the discussion wherever you want. But all to say, it should be short and sweet.
Great.
About stay as long as you want. So the big picture laws that govern public boards that you all know are Sunshine Law, Public Records, and Ethics. And then zooming in from there, there's certain particulars that every board has to know about, like the way their particular board operates. So just to fly through those, the Sunshine Law, the main thing you need to know is when you would have a meeting. Because a meeting between two or more members of this body has to be in the public, has to be noticed to the public, and minutes have to be taken. Staff takes care of all that, so the important thing for you to know is what is a meeting, because that's what you want to avoid out of the public's eye. So a meeting is just when two or more members communicate in any way about business that would come before this board. That's a meeting. So it can be informally, it doesn't have to be in person, it can be through emails, anything where, like I said, two or more members of this particular board communicate about items that could come before this board. If that ever happens, you just want to make sure that's at a public meeting. So avoid emails, back and forth in emails, text messages, if you see each other in Publix, that type of stuff. Keep all discussion about this board in the public meetings. Of course, you can discuss anything else outside. You can be friends and hang out otherwise, but just that. So public records is pretty, common sense. It's just any type of data that's recorded that you make or receive that has anything to do with the official business of the city or your board, that has to be kept pursuant to certain Florida statutory requirements about how long it has to be kept. So the important takeaway there is if you ever receive any type of data, and I say data because it's broad, voicemails, emails, text messages, papers, that have anything to do with the business of this board, just give it to staff. Make sure staff has it, and then you're fine. So common things that you'll run into are like paper copies that you receive. If it's just a copy and staff has the original version, then you can throw the paper copies out as soon as it loses its value to you. So it's the original, you just want to make sure that somebody in the city has an original of whatever you come across as far as public records. Ethics is the big ones to remember for ethics are that this board has certain reporting requirements at the state level that you want to, be apprised of. One of them is the Form 1, I believe it is, that you have to fill out, which is, it's an abbreviated financial disclosure. So it's relatively short. It's not to the lengths that elected officials have to go to, so it's hopefully painless. But that form, the Form 1 limited financial disclosure, has to be provided to the Florida Commission on Ethics once a year. So you just need to make sure you do that once a year. It's done electronically, I think through their website. Staff can help you out if you need, some.
It was just required,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
Yeah.
theoretically, we've got a year to do it. I don't remember if
Right.
it was June or July.
And they shoot you an email and a few reminders.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they're pretty good about
Oh, great.
being on top of you. So as long as you're on top of your email, you should, in theory, be able to.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So that's the one you have to do. There's two other disclosures just to keep in mind that you only have to do if that situation arises for you. One of them is the quarterly client disclosure, and that's just if you just file that if you or your partner or associate of your firm represents a client for compensation before the city. So if that ever happens, in that case, you would need to fill out the disclosure and provide it to the state. So that's just as needed.
Like,
Good.
in general, or someone who comes before this board and is represented?
It's generally the best practice to do it in general. So if you work for like an engineering firm that comes before the city often, asking for different development approvals or whatnot, whether it's this board or the city commission, you should disclose that to the state. So yeah, I think engineers, planners, maybe those are the ones who might run into it the most frequently. Law firms, stuff like that. So yeah, just remember if you or anybody who works for your company comes before the city, you just want to disclose that so it doesn't look like a conflict.
Does that include like GRU related items? Because like I work for an engineering firm and we don't really do much work for the city, but we do a lot of GRU projects, right? Like, is that something that just needs to be disclosed? It's not requiring like any elected official approvals. It's at like staff level.
Technically, GRU is not the city anymore.
Well, yeah, that's.
Well, technically they are.
I guess technically they are. Yeah.
So I'm not a little in the weeds. I could ask you after. If
Yeah, you can ask me after. And I would. So I should just preface this all by saying, as opposed to most of the other laws that are applicable to this board, where my office and the city would get involved with more hands-on, ethics, rules of ethics are all state level personal responsibilities for the board members. And so staff can kind of help point you out what we think you might want to look for, but it's an area of the law that you're really on your own with, so to speak. So I don't want to, again, we're happy to help you out informally, but that you really want to contact the Florida Commission on Ethics, and they have a hotline number that they're really receptive to. They'll respond to you right away. That you can call them about any ethics questions like that. So that would be a perfect time to do that, is if you have a question like, how does this work? And they'll give you direction. So I just want to caveat that even if I gave you an opinion about that particular instance you're mentioning, I would.
it's still my responsibility to figure it
Yes,
out.
and I would still encourage you to call the Commission on Ethics, and they can tell you exactly how to handle that. But yeah, so that would be for that quarterly client disclosure. And the last disclosure would be the quarterly gift disclosure. And it's quarterly meaning, that if this ever applies to you, you just got to make sure you do it quarterly. And what this is you file it only if you received a gift worth more than $100 from anyone that are not relatives, as defined pursuant to a particular statute, or gifts that are associated primarily with your employment. So if you get in other words, a gift above $100 that's from anybody except your relatives or your employer, you're supposed to disclose it to the state. I think it's all about optics, so it doesn't look like you're being influenced to sway your vote on any particular matter. So it's just that out of an abundance of transparency, they require that quarterly. So those are the three disclosures, just to keep in mind. There's behavioral kind of ethics floors that, and it's all in the presentation, so the presentation goes deeper, and then feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, but we don't need to go through it. It's pretty common sense, the behavioral mandates that the ethics law dictates. It's just like a floor of being a decent person type thing. The other big, the last important thing to know about the ethics law are voting conflicts. How voting conflicts work. They're, for those, keep in mind that if any matter comes before your board where you, let me get the class of people here right. It's you, a relative, and I'll read you what the definition of relative is in a second. But if you, a relative, a business associate, or a principal by whom you're retained, could potentially have a special private gain or loss as a result of the decision, then you have a voting conflict and you can't vote on that matter. So, and just to say that again, is like any matter that comes before this board, keep in mind, especially for engineers and folks who kind of work, you know, in areas that come before the city fairly often. If a matter is coming before your board where there could be a special private gain or loss to yourself, a relative, a business associate, or the principal by whom you're retained, you have to declare a voting conflict and you have to abstain from voting on that matter, but you can still discuss the matter. So you can still have discussion about it and offer your professional opinions or whatnot. You just can't vote. And the relatives that are included in that are father, mother, son, daughter, husband, wife, brother, sister, father-in-law, mother-in-law, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law. So
Mistress.
no mistress and no cousins. You know, the family circle is relatively tight there. So, and again, this is all in your materials, and if you ever have a question, the staff can help you through it. But just remember that for keeping in mind voting conflicts. Those are the big state laws. The remainder of what I'll just touch on are just some specifics to that could help govern how this board does its business. And one of those is, I think a majority of what this board does is hold quasi-judicial hearings, as opposed to legislative matters. Legislative matters are like what you just did about weighing in on new statutory requirements. It's where you can exercise the full breadth of your discretion. Whether you like something or not, your opinion, whatever you want to bring to the table, you can for a legislative matter. A quasi-judicial matter, however, your discretion is constrained. Because what it is quasi-judicial means it's kind of like a court hearing where you're adjudicating rights. You're adjudicating the property or personal rights of a person or legal entity. So because of that, there's all these common law restrictions that get imposed that dictate how you have to do that. And the three things you want to keep in mind when you are holding quasi-judicial hearings is that that due process has to be afforded to all affected parties. Staff really kind of takes the lead on that, so that just involves giving proper notice and defining who are truly affected parties as opposed to just general residents of the city. And it's those affected parties who get a heightened level of due process that, again, staff will kind of take the lead on that. For the second two are more pertinent to you personally, and that's when you're at the hearing, what you're really doing is you're accepting what's called competent substantial evidence. So you're like a courtroom, you're listening and receiving a bunch of evidence, whether it's coming from city staff or the property owners or anybody else, including members of the public who offer evidence. And evidence is a heightened threshold. It's not just an opinion. So it's not just that I think this development is going to cause a bunch of bad traffic. That's just an opinion, as opposed to if somebody comes up and says, I'm a traffic engineer with such and such years of experience, and based on this objective data and my analysis, this is going to and then their opinion is based in fact and evidence in that way. That could be competent substantial evidence that the board takes into account. So again, you're collecting this competent substantial evidence from all affected parties and all members of the public who speak, if it truly is evidence. You're collecting that evidence, and then you're applying it to the correct law that is applicable in that case. And what that means is the specific criteria that governs your particular decision for that hearing. So, for instance, for this last one with the sign height extension, the land development code lays out like 6 or 7 criteria that's in the code for how this board is to make that decision. And Allison presented those in her presentation. So those are the criteria you want to stick to. What you'll find is in all of the quasi-judicial hearings that this board holds, the criteria never includes just, do you like this project? Does it look cool to you, or does it do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing for the city? The city's going in a good or bad direction, or I like housing. This is pro-housing. This is anti-housing. It's none of that stuff. It's just, are these criteria met or not? And so, the policy making, all those more fun questions, so to speak, are handled at the policy level, the legislative level I mentioned. Quasi-judicial, all that's already been established. You're just applying it now. So that's how the majority, I think, of your decisions as a board operate is in that quasi-judicial realm. So, and this board does a great job. I've never, compared to a lot of cities where city attorneys are busy because boards kind of go rogue, like you guys do a good job. So that's a quasi-judicial hearing. A couple more just points about quasi-judicial hearings to keep in mind is in the interest of that first one I mentioned, due process, you do want to avoid ex parte contacts, they're called. And so that just means the best way to apply it, I think the easiest way, is just do not talk to anybody about that matter outside of the public hearing. Anybody's a little too much, because you can talk to, your spouse or your best friend who has nothing to do with it. It technically only that ex parte prohibition only applies to the parties, the affected parties in the case. But because unlike a courtroom where you might be dealing with 2 litigants, the affected parties for a matter that comes before this board could be hundreds of people. So rather than discerning, if you see somebody at Publix, whether you're an affected party or not, it's just easier to not talk about stuff, unless you're certain that they have nothing to do with the issue. So that's where you want to avoid any contact. So that includes emails. People might email you because your role, but don't reply, and just avoid communications and leave it all for the public hearing. That's an interest in due process.
I was just going to say, it doesn't happen as often now, but in the past, when we had very controversial items, it would not be uncommon for us to get emails to our personal email accounts. Just make sure you send them to Brittany. Also, sometimes it's hard. People call, and at least the past advice has always been, if I in fact talk to somebody and it's straight into quasi-judicial issues, you disclose before the hearing.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. So if you do have inadvertent ex parte contacts, it just happens, and before you realize what's happening, your duty is to disclose it at that hearing, to say, what the scope that had happened and what the scope of what was discussed. And the whole purpose really is for any affected parties to allow them to hear what you talked about, so that they can respond to that, if need be. So it's just an issue of like due process and fairness. What was I going to say? Oh, this is a tricky one, but under Florida law, which is unique to several other states, but as you all know well, land, the use of land is largely regulated with a two-tier process in the state with land use planning and then zoning. So the comprehensive plan and land use planning, all of that is the state law, for whatever reason, in the courts, not statutory, has deemed that legislative. So it's that first instance of decision-making where your discretion is as broad as it can be. Land use planning is all legislative, even a land use change for a particular piece of property. And this is where it gets confusing and why I'm telling you, is because often a land use change and a zoning change will come together and staff will present them together. It's just a weird quirk in Florida law that the land use portion is legislative, but the zoning portion is always quasi-judicial. Why that's tricky is you'll get seasoned engineers and other folks who might approach you behind the scenes outside of the public meeting and say, oh, I want to talk to you about this development, but we'll only talk about the legislative portion. And they're kind of hard to divorce that way because it just becomes kind of arbitrary. But we'll couch it in those terms that we'll just talk about the legislative portion so we can fully kind of try to convince you, and then we'll save the quasi-judicial portion for the end, at the hearing. Anyways, my advice is always, unless you are, that's a personal decision. If you want to walk that line, I would just counsel against, if it was me, having any of those discussions because it's just hard to separate those. Even planning has a hard time when they're given presentations. They'll give a detailed presentation for the land use portion to kick it off, and then when the rezoning comes back around, they're like, well, we already told you everything. Sometimes it's just a very abbreviated presentation. So that's just an example of how kind of interwoven those two processes are. And so, I would tend to avoid any ex-party discussions, and that might even include the legislative portion for situations like that. The last bit of advice I could give for quasi-judicial hearings is, so when you're making a decision, you generally, I would say, have 4 options anytime a decision comes before you. And unfortunately, I laugh about it with staff, but we're going through a phase right now where there's just not many controversial items for whatever reason. I know.
Too loud.
You guys need to get some controversy. But it goes through waves, and several years back we've had a ton of them that we were dealing with. But and I just preface the comments because keep in mind when you have a decision that comes before you, it's important to know, especially if it's controversial, but even for any of them, there's 4 options you really have. You can approve it outright, the way it was applied for. You can deny it outright if the competent substantial evidence shows that the correct law, the criteria you have to apply, is not met. So if the evidence that was all gathered shows that the criteria is not met, then you can deny it outright. So you can approve it outright, you can deny it outright, you can continue the meeting. That's one that sometimes is important to know. Again, that's why I was thinking controversial. For controversial ones or ones that get in the weeds at the hearing, so again, that hasn't happened here lately, but there's in past years for a really meaty issue, you might get a lawyer that shows up representing the property owner or an adjacent property owner that at the hearing just has like a mountain of evidence to support whatever their argument is. The board can't be expected to review all that evidence, of course, that night to make it an informed decision. So there is an ability to continue the hearing to a future date to make sure that the hearing takes place thoroughly and fairly with due process. There are limits to that. Staff would help you. You can't just keep continuing the meetings and hearings to, it's a delay tactic and stuff like that. But nonetheless, continuation is an option. I just want to point out. The last option is an approval with conditions, which, I think that happens routinely. As a practical matter, of course, this board relies heavily on staff, who are the experts and work day to day in this. And so staff will really vet issues well and bring it to you and make a recommendation that we recommend you approve this, but with these conditions, and the conditions are only there because it's to get that application to the place where it can be approved. So in other words, it was approvable and meets everything in the code and the comprehensive plan, except for like these 2 or 3 things that need to be done to fix this little area that was, askew a little bit. So that's when the recommendation is approved with conditions, and you can do that certainly. The reason I'm telling you all this is because, and again, this board doesn't do it, but if you on your own want to desire to make up conditions on the fly, because you're like, okay, thank you staff for your recommendation, but I would like to move to continue this, to approve this with the condition that X, Y, Z. You just have to be very careful with those conditions because there's a whole body of case law that governs the limits of what you can do. And in the state of Florida, there's what's called a dual rational nexus test that just says, without boring you too much, the conditions that you want to impose have to be related to to the impacts of that specific development. An example there is, say, traffic. If there's going to be a development on a street that's already taxed, it's already pursuant to traffic engineering, out of the standards of what it should be, well, you can't condition that new development on fixing stuff that development didn't cause. So that's the first portion of that condition decision tree, so to speak, is that whatever condition you want to impose has to be related and caused by that specific development, nothing else. The second tier is that once that's the case, then you can impose a condition, but the condition has to be in relationship to the specific issue that development is causing. So in other words, if they are causing an issue with traffic, using that same example, and you do want to make a condition that is tailored to the impact that development is causing, well, then your condition to fix that can't be, so we want you to deed us over a 5-acre public park, for instance. And cities do this. Like there's case law where, like, oh, you're causing a little bit of traffic. We're going to need 10 acres so we can have a public park like down the street. So that's where you got to be careful with that second tier, is that your condition is related to what they're doing. And so anyways, that is about as brief as I can get. Yeah, any questions?
There's a practical way to look at this. We're advisory on almost everything. The only thing we're not advisory on is the special use permits. And so when the special use permit has a list of, I think it's up to 13 different criteria. So if you decide you want to deny a special use permit, in your motion, you need to specify what the grounds are for doing that. And that gives these guys, if somebody wants to sue us, it gives our attorneys the ability to defend.
That's true. Weyerhaeuser was a big one, example of that.
Right.
That was a big denial that the city commission did, led to a lot of litigation, but my office and staff did a good job of counseling the commission and having a bunch of legitimate reasons for denial that led to success in litigation. But a lot of commissions or boards don't, they'll just deny, and it won't, like I said, they'll kind of go rogue, and that's when cities lose those cases. So, yeah, that's really all I had to say. If there's any questions, or like I said, any areas you want to touch on, I'm happy to hear.
I would just volunteer that if you're going to deny a special use permit based on incompatibility, that's probably the weakest criteria when you take that to court, unless you can give some specific reason why it is incompatible rather than a generic it's incompatible. Incompatible doesn't have a strong definition. I don't like gas stations. I've heard somebody from this board say that a couple of years ago. And you just, that's just
never
not
got
gonna work.
Votes.
People have rights to gas stations, and you may not like them, but you have to meet the ordinance.
Yeah. In that quasi judicial realm. But if it's legislative and you just want to say, I hate gas stations, we should keep them only in like the very corner of the city, you can do that legislatively, make that recommendation to the commission. So, all right. Well, good luck. Like I said, if you ever have any questions in the future, just
Okay.
reach out.
As always.
So see, I bored Bob. Like I said, I was trying not to.
Bob spoke more than anybody else, though, so I think you didn't bore him.
It's only the 10th or 12th time.
I know.
You guys should do it.
But it's always been you.
It's always been me. I
Yeah.
know.
And it's always been me. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the refresher, and yeah. I wish I had known some of this stuff like years ago when I was really screwing up, as opposed to now where I'm just only kind of sometimes. So, but very helpful. Okay, we're moving on to member comment, of which I have a member comment. So I did want to talk just briefly about our last meeting, because there were some after meeting emails and after meeting discussions, and so not among the board, but among other people. And it's just more of a reminder for us, like, we should give each other some grace. We should give each other, we should remember to treat everybody on the board with respect. We're all very passionate. That's why we're here. Sometimes that passion leads us to, it can boil over a bit, and it can lead us to kind of butt heads. And I think respectful disagreement is okay. I think we also should remember to respect the people that come before us. It takes a lot of gumption to come up and speak in public. And so make sure that anybody that comes before us, we afford them respect. And then also just remember that what we're dealing with is people's homes, people's businesses, their churches, their communities, their neighborhoods. And so when we're also speaking to people about these issues and speaking about the issues in particular, to afford those issues the respect that they deserve as well, because everything that comes before the board matters to somebody. If it didn't matter to anybody, it wouldn't be before us. And so just a reminder for all of us, I think generally we do a good job of this, but just a general reminder to do that. And then of course, with us, on the board, if you have something you want to say, just hit the button. That stupid little button will light up in front of me, and then I'll, at some point, remember to hit it, and then you'll be able to speak. And so, that'll be your time to speak. And if somebody wants to jump in because they disagree, just hit your button. And I will hit the button, and then once they're done making their point, you can jump in and say whatever you want to say to rebut them, or, but please do it respectfully. And the last thing, which is ironic because I'm kind of grandstanding right now, is just, we all do it from time to time. We're all very passionate. We should try to keep that to a minimum and try to keep focused on the agenda at hand and work at hand. These meetings run pretty long sometimes. I'm extending it right now to say this, so I know I'm aware of that. All right, that's my piece. That's my member comment. If anybody else has any member comments, now's the time. And seeing none, I'm going to end this meeting. The next meeting of the Plan Board, September 24th, 2026. And with that, this one's adjourned.